Spy for $1 billion. The story of Adolf Tolkachev. In Moscow, on the 7th floor of the U.S. Embassy, Novinsky Boulevard, Building 21, there was a small, cramped room, one of the most secret points of American intelligence throughout the USSR. It was only about a 20-minute walk to the Kremlin from there. It was in this tiny CIA residence that a complex operation codenamed Jack in the Box was launched on December 7, 1982. 2 men and 2 women got into a car in the embassy parking lot under the watchful eye of a Soviet policeman at the gate. He immediately reported the vehicle's movement to the Committee for State Security, KGB. It was known that the diplomats were heading to a party for a colleague's birthday. This information had been obtained in advance by Soviet intelligence through wiretapping the embassy staff's phone conversations. However, the KGB did not know the most important detail. 2 of these diplomats were CIA operatives, and the party itself was merely a cover story for the special operation. The large cake that one of the women was carrying actually concealed a clever device. There is much in common between the work of illusionists and spies. Both need to distract the audience's attention. In this case, the audience for the American agents was the personnel of the Soviet counterintelligence. U.S. diplomats' cars were almost always under surveillance. A KGB tracking vehicle kept a short distance behind. This meant that when turning a corner, the American car would disappear from the pursuer's view for a few seconds. It was during these brief moments that the magic was supposed to happen. In the front passenger seat of the American car sat a CIA agent. Under his usual clothing, he wore a suit typical of a Soviet retiree. On the lap of the woman sitting behind him rested that very cake. In reality, a complex mechanical device resembling a children's toy, Jack in the Box. Around 7 p.m., when the car turned onto the right street, the driver slowed down slightly. The door opened slightly, and the agent disguised as a retiree slipped out onto the sidewalk. At the same time, the woman in the back placed the cake onto the empty passenger seat, pressed a hidden lever, and a mannequin doll resembling the missing colleague sprang out of the box. Everything happened in a matter of seconds. As the CIA employee, now transformed into an inconspicuous passerby, took a few steps down the street, a KGB surveillance vehicle appeared around the corner. The Soviet operatives counted 4 people in the American car once again, and the vehicle continued on its planned route. The illusion was successful. However, the operation did not end there. The CIA agent still needed to change his appearance, ride a few stops on a tram for good measure, and walk through several streets to ensure that he was no longer being followed. He undertook all of this for one purpose: to meet with a person who was likely the most valuable agent of American intelligence on Soviet territory, the very spy for $1 billion. For most people, spies are almost mythical beings, known only from adventure films. If it weren't for the periodic news about exchanges and expulsions of agents, they could easily be placed on the same list as elves and unicorns. However, the story to be told is like a door into a real spy Narnia. It contains all the traditional attributes of spy cinema: hidden compartments, concealed cameras, a deadly pill hidden in a pen, coded signals, a well-thought-out surveillance system, evasion techniques, masterful disguises, and encrypted messages. But importantly, in this case, all of this is not fiction, but documentary reality. Each character has dates of birth and death, along with a unique biography between those dates. The main character is one of the most fortunate and effective agents of American intelligence in the USSR. For many years, he supplied the CIA with secret information, the total value of which was measured in more than $1 billion. And this took place in the very heart of Moscow, literally under the nose of the all-seeing KGB. After World War II, the United States faced a new main adversary, the former ally in the anti-Hitler coalition, the Soviet Union. The tragedy of Pearl Harbor was still fresh. In December 1941, the sudden attack by the Japanese on the American naval base resulted in the deaths of thousands of soldiers and the destruction of dozens of ships. Investigations revealed that one of the reasons for the disaster was the disunity among intelligence agencies, which failed to exchange warning information. To prevent such an occurrence from happening again, the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, was established in the United States in 1947, the first unified intelligence service in the country's history. Soon, the new agency significantly expanded its functions. In addition to gathering and analyzing data, it engaged in active espionage and conducted secret operations abroad. In the ensuing Cold War, the CIA found itself on the front lines of an invisible front, with the Soviet Union as its main adversary. American intelligence actively gathered information worldwide through defectors, immigrants, Soviet military personnel, and diplomats abroad. However, the most valuable data could only be obtained from deep within the USSR itself, and this presented a serious problem. The Soviet state tightly controlled the lives of its citizens and created a phenomenally effective system to counter foreign agents. One CIA employee in the early 1950s admitted that recruiting an informant with access to important secrets inside the Soviet Union was about as difficult as landing spies on Mars. It is no surprise that during those years, American knowledge of the USSR's military plans remained extremely limited. This was very dangerous, since the Cold War threatened to escalate into a hot phase at any moment. In the first few post-war decades, the CIA achieved only a handful of truly significant successes in its Soviet operations. Examples of such successes include the stories of Pyotr Popov and Oleg Penkovsky, arguably the most effective Soviet agents of the CIA in the 1950s and 1960s. Pyotr Popov. In 1953 in Vienna, Major of the GRU Pyotr Popov secretly handed a letter proposing cooperation to an American diplomat. In the following years, he became one of the most valuable CIA agents, supplying intelligence with numerous secret documents, including plans for the use of Soviet nuclear weapons in the event of war. In 1958, Popov was suddenly recalled to Moscow for an investigation. After interrogations, it was revealed that the KGB suspected him of treason. Initially, the intelligence agency attempted to use the exposed mole as a double agent, feeding him disinformation. But Popov managed to secretly warn the CIA that he had been compromised. A Soviet court sentenced him to death, and the spy was soon executed by firing squad. Oleg Penkovsky, in 1961, in Moscow, colonel of the GRU, Oleg Penkovsky, who was covering himself with a high position in the State Committee for Science, passed a letter to a representative of Great Britain during a diplomatic reception, proposing secret cooperation between the U.S. and Britain. Over the next few years, the new agent provided CIA and MI6 operatives with thousands of photocopies of secret documents related to the Soviet armed forces. This information played a crucial role during the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. Thanks to it, the West learned about the deployment and technical specifications of Soviet missiles in Cuba. At the end of 1962, Penkovsky suddenly disappeared. It later became clear that the KGB had suspected him. A hidden camera was installed in the colonel's apartment, and during a search, Western espionage equipment was discovered. The trial of Penkovsky in 1963 was public and widely covered by Soviet media. He was sentenced to death and soon executed by firing squad. After the exposure and elimination of these agents, the activity of the CIA's Moscow residency virtually came to a standstill for many years. The total number of CIA employees working undercover as diplomats in the embassy was reduced to just a few. The leadership feared that even if a promising source could be recruited within the USSR, there was a significant risk of obtaining a KGB plant who would provide Americans with false information. The story of Popov only reinforced such concerns. Extreme caution remained the guiding principle of operations until the mid-1970s. In January 1977, the head of the CIA's Moscow residency, Robert Fulton, stopped at a gas station in the center of Moscow that was frequently used by foreign diplomats. When he finished refueling and got back into his car, a stranger suddenly approached the vehicle. A stocky man of medium height, appearing to be around 50, dressed in an ordinary coat and a fur ushanka, like thousands of other Soviet citizens. The mysterious man asked in English, "Are you American? I need to talk to you." Fulton, surprised, inquired what he needed. The man then unexpectedly switched to Russian, apologized, handed Fulton a note, and immediately disappeared. The entire scene lasted no more than 15 seconds. A few minutes later, Fulton was sitting in his small office on the 7th floor of the embassy, reading the note he had received in a relatively safe environment. Only there could CIA agents discuss such surprises while remaining themselves. Outside the walls of this residency, even within the embassy building, they had to play the roles of ordinary diplomats. Among the support staff were Soviet citizens, some of whom secretly collaborated with the KGB. In the note, written in Russian, the unknown individual requested a confidential meeting with a representative of the embassy to discuss very important matters, and even included a detailed plan of where and how to hold the conversation. Fulton sent a report about the contact to CIA headquarters in Langley. The response from Washington was unequivocal. Ignore the attempt, as the likelihood of a provocation was too high. A few weeks later, the persistent stranger reappeared near Fulton's car, this time not far from the embassy building. He discreetly handed over a note, once again repeating his proposal for a personal meeting and indicating the coordinates of the proposed location, but without any additional details. The CIA decided once more not to respond. A couple of weeks later, the same man delivered a new letter to the head of the residency, this time more substantial. In the message, he stated that he understood the Americans' concerns and introduced himself in detail. An engineer working at one of the defense-related classified enterprises. Once again, the stranger set a date and location for a potential rendezvous. This time, Robert Fulton no longer considered the mysterious visitor to be a KGB employee. It was unlikely that the Chekists would be so persistently trying to attract attention by making so many attempts in succession. However, the skepticism of the CIA leadership remained unchanged. Too improbable seemed the coincidence that a random passerby would luckily choose the car of the head of the residency. In any case, Langley once again prohibited any contact. After a few months, Fulton completely ignored the stranger's next attempt. He tried to hand him some sort of package, but the resident did not engage. Such extreme caution was justified. Just the previous year, the CIA had lost several valuable informants, and the most notorious case was the failure of Agent Alexander Ogorodnik. This Soviet diplomat, who worked abroad in the 1970s, enjoyed a lavish lifestyle and agreed to cooperate with American intelligence for a generous reward. The first contacts took place in Colombia, after which Ogorodnik was transferred to Moscow to a high-ranking position. There, he continued to secretly pass on information. Most often, the exchange occurred through dead drops, designated locations where the agent would leave secret materials, documents, film rolls, etc., which a CIA employee would later discreetly retrieve. This old-fashioned tactic excluded personal meetings and was considered relatively safe. However, in 1977, the KGB arrested an employee of the American Embassy as she attempted to retrieve another package from Ogorodnik's dead drop. It turned out that the diplomat himself had been captured by Soviet counterintelligence shortly before, and during interrogation, he managed to swallow a poisoned capsule to avoid facing trial. The caught associate was immediately declared persona non grata and expelled from the country. Each such failure inflicted double damage on the CIA. The organization lost both its informant and its undercover agent. This is why there was such fear of provocations at headquarters. If the meeting proposed by the stranger turned out to be a KGB trap, yet another diplomat from the embassy would inevitably be expelled from the country empty-handed. Almost a year had passed since that first conversation at the gas station, and the mysterious voluntary helper made a new attempt. This time, in fact, he made two attempts. He reappeared at the same gas station and handed letters to the drivers of cars with American license plates on two occasions. Both times, the recipients were ordinary embassy employees who then passed the received envelopes to CIA representatives. Now the stranger decided to go all in and fully revealed his identity. The letter stated, "I, Adolf Georgievich Tolkachev, have been working at the Research Institute of Radio Engineering since 1954, currently serving as the chief designer." Both new messages were quite lengthy. Tolkachev detailed his biography, provided the full names of his wife and 12-year-old son, as well as their home address and both home and work phone numbers. Moreover, he immediately expressed his willingness to provide the Americans with information about a new secret radar system that his design bureau was working on. After all possible checks, the CIA leadership finally decided that the contact could be trusted. According to the data, the Soviet engineer indeed had access to valuable information. It was ordered to arrange a personal meeting to get acquainted with the new informant. Adolf Tolkachev was assigned the code name Sphere. It turned out that Tolkachev's decision to betray was not accidental, but rather influenced by a story he had heard on the Voice of America radio. This Western radio channel was one of the few windows to the world for Soviet people, and from there, Adolf learned about pilot Viktor Belenko. In 1976, Captain Belenko made a daring escape. He flew his MiG-25 interceptor from a Soviet airfield in the Far East to Japan, where he requested political asylum. In exchange for freedom and a new life, the pilot provided the Americans with secret information about the latest Soviet combat aircraft and radar systems. In one of his letters, Tolkachev explicitly stated that he wanted to do the same as Belenko. He even described how, following the pilot's escape, the design of the MiG-25 was altered and promised to reveal details about a new development in the same field, a secret aviation radar. For the CIA, such hints were worth their weight in gold. Existing Soviet radars had a vulnerability. They poorly detected low-flying targets, aircraft, or missiles, which gave a significant advantage to a potential adversary. Such sensitive facts were unlikely to be disclosed by Soviet intelligence simply for the sake of catching a spy. This information appeared extremely valuable and significantly influenced the decision to make contact with Tolkachev. After the decision was made to establish contact, CIA officer John Gilcher was appointed as the handler for Sphere. He was born and raised in the United States in a family of Russian émigrés, so he spoke the language fluently. He spoke almost without an accent. Only barely perceptible intonations might have revealed him as a native of the Baltics rather than America. After serving in the military, John joined the intelligence agency and eventually received an assignment in Moscow. His first task was to cautiously make contact with the new agent. It was impossible to call Tolkachev directly from the embassy. The KGB not only monitored every move of American diplomats, but also tapped their phone lines. Even the apartments of CIA employees could be under surveillance. For confidential calls, residents used street payphones. Gilcher and his wife devised an entire plan. Officially, they were going to the Bolshoi Theater. During one of the intermissions, John slipped into the foyer and made his way to a payphone, while his wife distracted their Soviet colleague among the local embassy staff. As it turned out, she was working for the KGB. The brief call served as the first greeting. The American confirmed to Tolkachev that his letters had been received and that he would be contacted more substantively soon. Gilcher then calmly returned to his seat. The Soviet observer noticed nothing. During the next call, the handler informed Agent Sphere of the coordinates where a package with detailed instructions awaited him. The bundle was hidden in an ordinary work glove left near the street payphone. Adolf Tolkachev easily found the hideout and retrieved its contents. Inside, he discovered detailed instructions on how to transmit secret information to the CIA. The scheme involved what was called a secret letter. The Americans prepared a fake letter. Supposedly, an American tourist in Moscow was writing to her grandfather in the States. According to the plan, the agent was to write the secret information he knew on the back of this letter, not directly, but using special copying paper, encoding the information with a conditional code. Tolkachev was then instructed to send the envelope to the specified address in the U.S., which actually led directly to the CIA. The agency understood perfectly well that Soviet censorship would almost certainly open the international shipment for inspection. This was standard practice. However, the encrypted text was not supposed to attract attention, and even if it were discovered, it could not be read without a special key. Tolkachev was provided with a special table for encoding. Only CIA personnel had the same one, so only they could crack the code. A few weeks later, the Moscow residency indeed received the tourist's letter from Adolf Tolkachev. The envelope showed signs of having been opened, but the secret code remained intact. With its help, Agent Sphere transmitted information about the latest Soviet developments, specifically about the newest radar models, guidance systems, and recent test results. This information was of immense value to American intelligence. Notably, Tolkachev flawlessly followed all the instructions in preparing the secret message. It became clear that the time had come to meet with the individual in person. Closer contact needed to be established, and the terms of cooperation discussed. Of course, personal meetings with an illegal agent on Soviet territory were extremely risky and could lead to a major international scandal in the event of failure. However, the CIA deemed that the game was worth the candle. A Soviet specialist with access to secret developments was precisely the prize they had long sought, and Adolf Tolkachev could very well turn out to be that invaluable source. The late 1970s, Adolf Tolkachev turned 50 years old. By the standards of the Soviet system, he was quite a successful individual. He held a high position as the chief designer at the Phasotron Design Bureau within a research institute serving the defense industry. The Tolkachev's apartment was located in one of the prestigious Stalin-era skyscrapers near the American Embassy. Such housing was allocated only to nomenklatura personnel in important positions. During their first face-to-face meeting, John Gilcher immediately inquired about the new agent's motivation. What had driven him to take such a risk? Adolf initially evaded a direct answer, stating that it's all very complicated and would take a long time to explain. Eventually, he admitted only that he was a dissident by nature. The parties then moved on to financial matters. Tolkachev recalled the story of pilot Viktor Belenko and noted that he would like to receive from the U.S. the same reward that was given to that defector. Gilcher replied that he did not know exactly how much was paid to Belenko and handed Tolkachev 1,000 rubles, adding that the CIA was prepared to pay him that amount monthly. The Soviet engineer requested 10,000 utlan, but truth be told, both figures seemed laughable in light of the colossal risks involved. For comparison, Tolkachev himself, as the chief designer at a closed research institute, earned over 300 rubles a month, several times more than the average engineer's salary in the USSR. Later, he would admit that he needed the money more as a symbol of recognition, since in the conditions of total scarcity that prevailed even in Moscow, many things could not be purchased for any amount of rubles. Before parting, the agent handed the curator a notebook containing another batch of secret information he had obtained. Tolkachev immediately lamented that if the Americans had provided him with a miniature camera, he could have photographed documents. For instance, late in the evening when his colleagues had already left the department, as rewriting by hand or copying complex blueprints was incredibly labor-intensive. The first personal meeting lasted about 40 minutes. Gilcher and Tolkachev conversed while strolling through the deserted and frozen January streets of Moscow. Following this meeting, the CIA officer reported to his superiors that the new agent had proven to be very responsible and expressed a willingness to continue cooperation. For the subsequent meetings, the Americans devised a special conspiracy scheme. They selected several convenient locations near Tolkachev's home so that he could easily go out for a walk. Each of these points was given a code name, such as Valera or Nina. The operation proceeded as follows. A CIA officer would call Adolf at home and pretend to have dialed the wrong number while searching for someone named Valera. Tolkachev would respond that the caller had reached the wrong number and hang up. This was the signal. The agent would then leave his house and head to the designated location, say a bench in a park marked with the code name Valera, where his curator would already be waiting. Thus, over the course of several subsequent meetings, Agent Sphere continued to provide the CIA with invaluable information. For example, he transmitted a detailed description of the design and onboard systems of the latest Soviet fighter jet, the Su-27. The American side fulfilled one of Tolkachev's wishes. They handed him a miniature hidden camera for photographing documents. Additionally, the CIA partially increased the salary of the valuable informant, immediately paying him 5,000 rubles, half of the amount he had requested. However, the agent's appetites quickly grew. At the next meeting, Tolkachev put forth new demands. First, to obtain a capsule of poison in case of arrest, and second, to significantly raise his fee. He now demanded a reward from the CIA in 6 figures and in dollars. According to him, that was the amount mentioned in radio broadcasts about pilot Belenko. For the agency, these requests posed a serious dilemma. A poisonous capsule in the hands of a relatively new agent was far too dangerous. What if he panicked and decided to poison himself, even at a false alarm? Moreover, if Soviet authorities were to accidentally discover hidden cyanide with the engineer, there would be no doubt left about his espionage activities. The financial aspect also appeared complicated. We were talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars, an unprecedented sum for any intelligence operation. Officially, it was not possible to buy or exchange currency in the USSR at that time. There was only a black market where $1 cost several rubles. Even if they agreed, there was the question of where Tolkachev would store such amounts and how he could spend them without attracting attention. The Moscow residency would have to prove to their superiors that the new agent was indeed worth that money. After discussions, the CIA reached a compromise decision to forego providing the poison pill for now, but to satisfy Tolkachev's financial request. When specialists analyzed the wealth of information received from Sphere, their conclusions impressed the leadership. Thanks to the information on Soviet developments, the Americans could save tens of millions of dollars for their military-industrial complex. By knowing in advance which technologies the adversary was developing, the Pentagon would be able to allocate its own resources more wisely. Furthermore, Tolkachev himself demonstrated remarkable foresight. In one of his letters to his curator, he outlined a detailed plan for work over the next 10 to 12 years, specifying what data he could gradually provide and what he would need for that. His goal, candidly articulated there, was to inflict maximum damage on the Soviet Union. The determination and success of Sphere convinced the CIA leadership to undertake unprecedented expenditures. For Adolf Tolkachev, they sanctioned a record reward, approximately $200,000 as a one-time payment and then around $300,000 annually. Such sums had never been paid to any agent before. In early 1980, U.S. Air Force experts estimated that Tolkachev's secrets would save the American budget up to $1 billion, since his blueprints and reports would remain relevant for at least 8 to 10 years. Thus, the Soviet engineer effectively became a billion-dollar spy. Of course, there was no official title for such a designation. Soviet newspapers did not publish rankings of the highest-paid spies. Nevertheless, the fact remains, the chief designer of the Soviet Research Institute earned more through his betrayal than the President of the United States did in his legitimate position. Indeed, implementing these extravagant payments in Soviet reality was not easy. The late 1970s to early 1980s in the USSR is referred to as the era of stagnation. The main concern for citizens at that time was not how to earn money, but where to find the most essential goods. Even if Tolkachev had wanted to spend all the rubles he received, there was not much to spend them on. He mostly kept the money at home, storing stacks of bills in the attic where his wife and son did not look. Far more important to him were the material goods that the Americans brought at his request, scarce imported items that were unavailable to ordinary Soviet shoppers. The CIA supplied Sphere with things that other Soviet engineers could only dream of, from quality razors and French medications to office supplies from Czechoslovakia and vinyl records of Western rock bands for his growing son. They also provided him with literature banned by censorship, such as books by Soviet dissidents published abroad. Part of the payments was accumulated by the CIA in a confidential bank account abroad in Tolkachev's name. The operatives increasingly urged Adolf to think about the future and consider the option of fleeing the country. Initially, Tolkachev brushed them off, but over time, he began to contemplate emigration. Around this time, another high-profile operation occurred, demonstrating that even the KGB could make mistakes. In 1980, KGB Major Viktor Shemov managed to secretly leave the USSR with his wife and young daughter. CIA operatives hid them in a car, crossed the border into Finland, and then transported the fugitives to America. For several more months, Soviet authorities were convinced that the Shemov family had disappeared as a result of a typical criminal incident. So flawlessly did the exfiltration proceed. In the same year of 1980, Tolkachev's curator was replaced. The new liaison for the Sphere agent became operative David Rolfe. This appointment aligned with the CIA's new strategy. They began sending operatives to Moscow under so-called deep cover. Whereas previously agency personnel operated under the guise of diplomats, now technical and support staff from the embassy were involved in the residency. The KGB usually monitored such ordinary employees much less closely, especially during the first months after their arrival, while they lived routine lives: home, work, grocery store, home, and once a week to the ice rink. Furthermore, the newly arrived operatives had not previously been active in other areas, meaning that Soviet counterintelligence had no prior information about them. David Rolfe belonged to this fresh wave of invisible agents. One evening in October 1980, David Rolfe entered the American Embassy building with his wife, under the watchful gaze of the duty militiaman at the entrance. The presence of his wife created the impression that the couple was simply returning from a walk. Inside, Rolfe immediately went to the technical services room where he prepared his disguise. He changed clothes and applied makeup, transforming into an inconspicuous technician in overalls. The state security monitored such workers in gray coveralls much less closely than they did regular diplomats. In his new guise, David left the embassy and began to circle around the city, carefully evading any potential surveillance. He traveled several stops on a tram, entered a flower shop, then switched to a bus and walked along various streets. Throughout this time, the operative attentively observed his surroundings. He looked for suspicious vehicles and scrutinized fellow passengers and random passers-by. Toward the end of his route, he suddenly dashed into the entrance of a residential building and quickly ascended several floors, hoping to provoke any potential pursuers to chase after him. Rolfe hid on the staircase and listened. Everything was quiet. The entire operation to shake off any surveillance took about an hour and a half. By 9 o'clock in the evening, the CIA officer arrived at the agreed-upon meeting place. This was his first encounter with Sphere. After exchanging coded phrases, they got down to business. Rolfe informed Tolkachev that his request for a capsule of poison would finally be fulfilled. The special agent would receive it at one of their upcoming meetings. Previously, the Americans had stubbornly denied this request several times, but the risk to the agent was increasing, and headquarters had changed its decision. The fact is that at the institute where Adolf worked, security rules regarding document handling had been tightened. Previously, Tolkachev could take secret folders from the archive under personal responsibility. For example, he could take a couple of materials during his lunch break, hiding them under his coat, and upon returning after lunch, discreetly put them back. Now, however, when materials were issued, it was required to leave one's official pass in the archive, without which one could not even exit the building. Essentially, the old scheme of take a folder, bring it home, return it, was no longer viable. Nevertheless, Tolkachev found a way out. He had a friend in the archive who agreed to violate the instructions and issue documents without the pass as collateral. When Rolfe asked if this was too dangerous, the Soviet engineer merely shrugged, suggesting that everything they did was inherently risky. The CIA residency decided to create a perfect duplicate of his pass for Sphere, but this would take time. In the meantime, Adolf had to continue acting at his own risk. In 1981, a sudden exposure occurred, but not from the KGB or the Institute's management, rather on the home front. Adolf's wife, Natalia, one day discovered a miniature camera and other spy equipment on the table that her husband had carelessly forgotten to hide after another round of photographing documents. Natalia immediately understood what her husband was involved in. Tolkachev did not deny the obvious and, to deflect suspicion, claimed that he was supposedly cooperating with the KGB. However, his wife was not reassured. She pointed out that such an adventure put both her and their son at risk and demanded that he immediately cease all espionage activities. Adolf had to lie and promise that he would stop his risky contacts. Ironically, it was largely Natalia who inspired Tolkachev to take on the dangerous mission. His wife's maiden name was Kuzmina, and her family had suffered greatly during the Stalin era. Natalia's father, Ivan Kuzmin, was a journalist and editor of the industry newspaper Light Industry. Her mother, Sophia, was born into a family of Ukrainian Jews. Sophia's father settled in Denmark and occasionally invited his daughter to visit him abroad. This was enough to raise suspicions during the height of the Great Terror. In 1937, Sofia Kuzmina was arrested on fabricated charges of participating in a Trotskyist conspiracy and executed a week later. Her husband Ivan was arrested shortly thereafter and sent to labor camps for 10 years, while 2-year-old Natasha ended up in an orphanage. Ivan Kuzmin returned from imprisonment only in 1947, and he was rehabilitated in the mid-1950s. A year before his death, Ivan managed to tell his grown daughter the truth about her mother's fate. Tolkachev was well aware of this family history. He knew that his wife read samizdat, refused to sign a letter of approval at work regarding the deployment of Soviet tanks in Czechoslovakia in 1968, and generally harbored no warm feelings for the Soviet regime. All these facts significantly motivated Adolf to decide to act against the regime. Moreover, Tolkachev's own life path led him to this choice. He was born in the late 1920s in Kazakhstan, but as a child, he moved with his family to Moscow. He received a technical education, graduating from the Polytechnic Institute, and was assigned to the very research institute of radio engineering, Phasotron. In fact, he worked there his entire life. Although Tolkachev never openly engaged in opposition activities, he was, as they say, keeping his ear to the ground. He read banned literature, followed the fates of well-known dissidents, such as academician Andrei Sakharov, writer Alexander Solzhenitsyn, and others, and listened to broadcasts from Voice of America. The desire to strike a blow against the Soviet system gradually grew within him. After the sensational story of Viktor Belenko's defection, Tolkachev realized that the most powerful weapon against the regime could be not a gun or a bomb, but ordinary papers, secret reports, schematics, and blueprints that lay on his desk. In one letter to the CIA, he confessed that he had never been to the West and was far from romanticizing the United States. But he had the impression that there he could live as a free man. Thus, he chose Americans as his allies. Despite all the security measures in place, Tolkachev continued to regularly supply the Americans with secrets right under the noses of Soviet counterintelligence. In 1982, the new leadership of the Residency brought in additional deep operatives, like Rolf, to work with him. Tolkachev was even issued a compact radio transmitter for emergency communication over distances. However, he still insisted on face-to-face meetings. The Sphere agent considered it fundamentally important to see his handlers in person, and the CIA took the wishes of their valuable informant into account. Meetings took place either on the street or right in Tolkachev's personal car. He had recently acquired a discreet Zhiguli. The tightening of secrecy protocols at the Institute did not hinder the flow of information. At almost every meeting, Adolf managed to pass on hundreds of new photographs of blueprints and reports. However, around the middle of 1983, something went wrong. Tolkachev missed several prearranged contact points. A couple of meetings had to be canceled. There were suspicions that KGB agents were lurking nearby. Finally, the Residency staff tried to call him at home, but the phone was silent. Tension was rising. there had been no news from the CIA's most valuable spy for several months. At the beginning of December, a meeting was scheduled to take place. To ensure they avoided surveillance this time, the CIA employed the tried and true trick of Jack in the Box. The operative managed to shake off his pursuers, and at the agreed time, he finally met with Tolkachev. Adolf apologized and explained his prolonged absence by saying that he had been feeling unwell lately due to hypertension. His high blood pressure had thrown him off balance. Nevertheless, he did not come empty-handed. He brought a thick stack of notes and several rolls of film containing photographs of the latest batch of secret documents. By the beginning of 1984, the CIA had even prepared a plan for the possible evacuation of Sphere, along with his family, to the States. However, Tolkachev ultimately resolutely refused to emigrate. He told his handler about acquaintances who had moved to Israel and complained in their letters about their longing for their homeland. Adolf admitted that he realized he could not live in a foreign country or even in another city. Thus, the escape plan was put on hold. For the Americans, this turned out to be good news, in essence. Their valuable agent continued to work on the ground. In 1983, a troubling episode occurred in Sphere's life. One day, Adolf was unexpectedly summoned to the Institute's management, supposedly regarding some routine matter. In the director's office, the phone rang. The head of the Institutional Security Service, which reported directly to the KGB, requested a list of all employees who had worked on a specific type of radar. Tolkachev went cold. He had literally passed information about this secret radar to the Americans just a month ago. Horrified, he returned to his office, almost certain that he had been compromised. The next day, he took a sick leave and frantically set about clearing away evidence. At home, Tolkachev gathered the hidden cache, spy cameras, the transmitter, and banned books, all compromising items, and took them out of the city. There, on a deserted road, he destroyed the dangerous items. He burned the evidence and discarded the metal parts of the devices one by one out of the car window on his way back to Moscow. As he returned to work, especially when entering the management office, Adolf invariably prepared for the worst. He discreetly unscrewed the very capsule of poison from his pen and placed it under his tongue to avoid being captured alive. He did this every time he was called to the carpet. Tolkachev carried the capsule with him to meetings with the Americans, and even when simply taking documents out of the Institute. Weeks and months passed, but silence still surrounded him. No news surfaced about the mysterious investigation. It was unclear whether it was related to a leak of information or just a coincidence. One thing was clear: at all costs, Adolf Tolkachev had decided not to surrender alive. This drama had another invisible participant. In the late 1970s, a certain Edward Lee Howard, a 28-year-old employee of a consulting firm from Chicago, decided to drastically change his life and see the world. He applied to the CIA and successfully passed the selection tests. In 1982, Howard was offered a position in the Moscow residency. During his preparation for the assignment, he was granted access to some documents from the Moscow office of the CIA. It is possible that among these papers was the alias Sphere, that is, information about the existence of a valuable agent within the Soviet Defense Institute. Whether Howard knew the agent's real name remains unknown. However, he never got to work. Just before his departure to Moscow, Edward failed a polygraph test. Subsequent tests only confirmed the issue. It turned out that Howard had concealed information about some minor offenses from his past. This was compounded by known data regarding his alcohol abuse. As a result, in 1983, Edward was not only removed from the assignment, but also dismissed from the CIA altogether. Before his dismissal, he signed a non-disclosure agreement regarding all information obtained during his service, but he harbored resentment. During a tourist trip across Europe, Howard made contact with representatives of Soviet intelligence. For $60,000, the former agent agreed to pass on everything he knew. Among this information was the revelation that the CIA had a highly valuable informant inside one of the Soviet research institutes related to defense. Even without a specific name, this was enough for KGB officials to begin the hunt. The only question was when the mole would be identified. Meanwhile, despite the oppressive atmosphere and his declining health, Tolkachev continued his activities. He tried to avoid taking papers out of the building. He often photographed documents on site, such as in the empty restroom of the Institute. The film sometimes turned out poorly due to inadequate lighting, but he still managed to extract valuable information. The data from Sphere remained of immense value. During one of the meetings, his handler informed Adolf that nearly $2 million had accumulated in his overseas account. In early March 1985, Tolkachev failed to make contact, missing a scheduled meeting. Over the following months, the Americans left him signals, but he never appeared. Another meeting was planned for early June, but it had to be canceled by the CIA themselves. Surveillance by the KGB had clearly intensified. A few days later, on one of the June weekends, Tolkachev and his wife were returning to Moscow in their car. Their vehicle was suddenly stopped by a traffic police crew. Adolf took his documents and exited the vehicle. At that moment, several individuals sprang from an ambush, grabbed the engineer, and literally carried him off to a nearby service van. None of these traffic officers were real. The operation was conducted by a KGB capture team. The day before, Soviet counterintelligence had secretly searched the Tolkachev's apartment and discovered a complete set of evidence. Hidden cameras, a radio receiver, large sums of money, a poison capsule, recordings, and other items that directly indicated Adolf's espionage activities. A week after the arrest of Sphere, a CIA officer arrived for the next scheduled meeting. Ensuring that he wasn't being followed, he approached the usual spot. Next to him was Tolkachev's familiar Zhiguli. At that very moment, several sturdy men rushed out from hiding. They seized the spy and forcibly pushed him into a car, subsequently taking him for interrogation at the KGB headquarters on Lubyanka. During a search, they found hidden spy cameras, bundles of cash, and other evidence that clearly indicated he was not an ordinary diplomat. That very night, the detainee was declared a persona non grata and expelled from the country. At the CIA residency in Moscow, it was immediately understood. If the state security officials were in the right place at the right time, then the story of the billion-dollar spy was over. In August 1985, a Soviet KGB officer working in Rome defected to the West and revealed information to the Americans about a traitor in their ranks. An agent with the code name Robert, a former CIA officer who was preparing for an assignment in Moscow, but was dismissed just before the trip, passed secret data to the USSR. For the specialists working on Soviet matters, there was no doubt. The valuable informant in Moscow had been compromised by Edward Lee Howard. The FBI summoned Howard for questioning, but he denied everything. He was released with covert surveillance established, but this also proved ineffective. Soon, the cunning individual managed to evade the watch, left his home unnoticed, flew out of the country, and after some time surfaced in the Soviet Union, where he was granted political asylum. In the 1990s, Howard even published memoirs in which he continued to deny his involvement in Tolkachev's downfall. Then, in the early 2000s, the 50-year-old former spy died under mysterious circumstances. He reportedly fell from a height in his Moscow apartment. The trial of Adolf Tolkachev took place in 1986. He was sentenced to the highest penalty, death by firing squad. The day before his execution, he was allowed to meet with his son. Adolf asked for his forgiveness. His son replied that there was nothing for his father to apologize for. In October 1986, the state agency TASS officially announced that Adolf Tolkachev had been shot for espionage and treason against the motherland. Natalia Tolkacheva was tried for knowing about her husband's actions but failing to report them to the authorities. The spy's wife received a 3-year prison sentence. In 1987, she was released under an amnesty and returned to Moscow. In March 1991, Natalia died of cancer. Then, in December 1991, the Soviet Union itself came to an end. The empire to which Adolf Tolkachev had once declared his secret war.